You know, when you're growing up, you never stop to realize um, that there are things that now are just, they're totally gone. But you don't realize it at the time. At least I didn't. Hi, it's Burl. If you like content on my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. Just wanted to talk today a little bit about what we don't have now that we did then. Um, you know, life was, back then it was slower, it was simpler. Uh, we didn't have necessarily a lot, at least my family didn't, but it was enough. It was more than enough, really. Uh, as I look back, I not only remember the things, but also things about myself, that are different now, and your family and all those things that have changed over the years. Maybe you've lost loved ones or something like that, and they're gone now. But there's just things like rotary phones. I remember, and that's all we had. We didn't have even push button. Push button came later, and they called those princess phones, and at least some of them they did, unless they were on the wall. But the princess ones would like sit on next to your bed on the nightstand or something like that. But I remember thinking that was so fancy. I think my aunt was the first one that I remember getting one, and then eventually we got one. But it was a big deal to get a princess phone. But now, with the phones that we have, with everything, all the gadgets on it, I think about my grandfather a lot, my mom's dad. He loved electronics and tinkering with stuff and seeing how things worked and everything. And he would be in heaven today, I'm sure. But another thing that I remember very well was when we went from vinyl records, like 45s and 33 and a thirds and 78s, to 8 tracks and cassettes. Now 8 tracks, at least as far as I remember, you couldn't really record on, but cassettes you could. So, you'd be listening to the radio and you'd want to record a song. So you had to make sure your recorder was ready for the song to be played and all that. Because radio was your big, channel to the world of music. I mean, because then once you heard it on the radio, then you could go buy the record or something like that. But cassette tapes, 8 tracks, those were big things, and I mean, just everybody had them. I mean, I really can't think of anybody that I knew that didn't have a cassette recorder and play their music or record, their voice, record something silly. We also, when I was born in 1958. And probably through the 60s, I'd say, maybe a little bit into the 70s, you had, certain delivery services that you really don't have today necessarily, like milk delivery. There was milk delivery guys. How much milk do you want for the coming week or whatever? And, my mom would give them the order. Another one I remember, I don't know how many people will remember, it was something called Charlie Chips. They came in a tin can, and you'd order those. I think it was like every month or something like that, or maybe once a week. Really don't remember for sure, but that was another thing, was those delivery services. And then this is a really big one to me, was playing outside till it was dark. You know, it today I don't witness it as much. I guess because, you know, maybe kids are inside on their phones, or, you know, playing video games or something like that. But, you know, back when I was growing up, you know, that's another thing I look back on with great fondness, was playing outside with my friends till it was dark, you know, and someone had to call you in, you know, even then. You know, it's time to come in, you know, of course, especially in the summer, when you're on, you know, summer vacation. You know, and you just, I mean, you know, you played, you know, at least in my neighborhood, we played football, basketball, baseball, you know, everything imaginable. You know, we play army games and cowboys and Indians, and, you know, pretend we were superheroes and that type of thing, and just play outside, you know, all day long, unless the weather was horrible. Sometimes even then you might go out in the rain or whatever it was. And another thing that it seems hard to imagine today, especially to young people, is that there were only 3 channels. If you were lucky, you could get a 4th, maybe with PBS. But there were 3: CBS, NBC, and ABC. And what you saw was what you got. And I think about it today, where everything is streamed, or, you know, you can get on your phone or your computer or whatever it is, your TV, and you can watch pretty much anything, even if it was just released recently, you know. So it's a whole new different world. But it, you know, it created a sense of anticipation. You know, if you were watching a series, whatever it might be, you know, Bonanza or Andy Griffith, Twilight Zone, whatever, Star Trek, you know, you'd wait with anticipation for the next week, for your new episode. And then, you know, there really were, you know, water cooler moments where people would gather at the water cooler to discuss, you know, the latest episode of whatever, or at school or wherever you were. You know, people would gather together in my neighborhood and discuss what they, you know, the Star Trek episode they watched the night before. So TV was a lot different. Of course, you know, there was, back then, The Wizard of Oz was only shown once a year, and that was in March, if my memory serves me right. And everybody looked forward to it. And everybody, if we were outside playing, you know, our families would call us and say, "Hey, The Wizard of Oz is coming on," and go inside and watch The Wizard of Oz. Another thing was handwritten letters. You may still get them on occasion, but now it's text and emails and, you know, things like that. But back then, you know, a handwritten letter meant a lot, and you would just go back and reread it, and, you know, fold it up, put it back in its envelope, or put it in a drawer, tuck your letters away somewhere. But, you know, we really don't have that anymore, and it doesn't seem as intimate or as personal today. You know, the handwritten letters were more personal, and I think feelings were expressed better then. I don't know about any of you, but to me, texts, they're convenient, they're handy. You know, they serve a purpose. But sometimes you can really misunderstand what somebody's trying to say in a text. But in a handwritten letter, I don't really think there was any mistaking, you know, what someone wanted to say to you, or a point they wanted to get across, or tell you how much they love you, or whatever. you know, things back then weren't perfect, of course. You know, the 60s were very turbulent and that type of thing, you know, and every decade has its problems. And, you know, you even had problems with some of the so-called technology back then. You know, your cassette tapes would rip and tear and all that. Your 45s would scratch and then they'd skip. But, you know, it was, I think you had to have more, there was more patience then, I think. And there was more of a connection, as I was just talking about with the letters. You know, better chance to make connections with people when you went out in the neighborhood and talked to people. But for a large part, I think anymore today we're missing that. You know, you were present. You know, you were in the moment. And, pardon my dog there. You know, today is faster, much faster. But and there are advantages to certain things. You know, if you need to get a hold of emergency squad quickly, you can, that type of thing. But you know, it's different now, very different. Not saying it was necessarily better all the time, but it was different. So, you know, maybe you want to take some time this week to reflect back on those things. If you're older like me, but if you want to make a comment, please do. I'd love to hear from you and see what you remember from your growing up days. Thanks. Bye-bye.